Good morning. So for the next talk, I would like to request Dr. Shankar Narayan Rao to come on the dais. Dr. B.S. Shankar Narayan Rao is a professor of neurophysiology and former registrar of NIMHANS. His research interest lies in the domain of learning and memory. He has published over 150 research papers, including in journals like Neuron and PNAS. I would now like to request Dr. B.S. Shankar Narayan Rao to introduce Dr. Northoff.
Dr. Northoff, can you hear us?
I can see you and hear you.
Yeah. So thank you very much
nice
for
to be
joining
there.
for this international symposium. And it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And George is a renowned neuroscientist. He's a philosopher and a psychiatrist. It's a wonderful combination. And Georg Northoff holds the Canada Research Chair for Mind, Brain Imaging and Neuroethics at the University of Ottawa. His interdisciplinary work explores the neural and philosophical foundations of consciousness, self and brain's intrinsic activity, which is responsible for bridging the neuroscience, psychiatry and philosophy. So Dr. Northoff is especially known for his pioneering contributions to understand resting state brain and its role in shaping consciousness and mental disorders. And more importantly, he is especially known for those who are working in the consciousness and the higher functions of the brain. He has a spatio-temporal theory of consciousness, and that has been appreciated and applauded in terms of understanding the neuropsychological and neurophysiological basis of consciousness. And his contributions are very immense. He has over 400 publications with more than 110 H-index or so. He's a neuroscientist, philosopher, psychiatrist, and everything put together. He tried to understand the brain, the mind, and the consciousness all put together. How does the neural mechanisms transform and translate the brain functions? So Georg Northoff, so it's a great pleasure to have you, and I welcome you to deliver your lecture.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and happy to be there, at least via Teams. So I will share my slides. Let me see how that works, just a second. Share, where is the share? Here, just a second, I'm almost there. Now, let me try this one. Can you see the slides now? Can you see the slides?
Yeah, maybe you can, yeah. So we can see the slides, and we can have the full screen, please.
Now you can see them full?
Yes, yes. Yeah, thank you, George.
And I'm sure you know the person. So Bindu, I don't see you there, but I'm sure you're there in the audience in the first row. So this is really an honor to you. It's a big honor for me to give this talk, and also because we met 2-3 years ago, and you really introduced me to consciousness, to you as a person, and also to India, which is for me a both wonderful personal and scientific experience. So, and one thing you particularly introduced me to is the tunnels of NIMHANS. We had some beautiful car rides through the tunnel of NIMHANS, and I really enjoyed that. I never saw a university campus with a tunnel like this, and I really enjoyed our common rides. So, and in addition to the car rides, I also enjoyed really the connection you made between your group, your institute, and me. And for me, and some of you who participate in our bi-weekly lab meetings, know this is really a wonderful exchange, a cultural enrichment. I learn a lot about Indian culture, how you view consciousness. And I do think, and I'm not saying that because I give this talk to India, and in India, that I think the world can learn a lot, in particular the Western neuroscience studies of consciousness can learn a lot from you. So, and that already starts here. What is consciousness? Of course, the what question is always the most difficult one. So consciousness, you know all this. This comes from the Western tradition, the different levels of mind, from psychodynamics, Freud, and others. But I think one key problem in the Western world is that consciousness is usually considered to be in the head or in the body. Yeah. So then they assume specific phenomenal qualities, qualia, and they locate them in anterior or posterior regions of the brain or whatever, and things like that. And I do think that consciousness is much more. And I'm sure you know this much better than I do. Consciousness is not just inside the head. Consciousness places us in the world. We are part of the world because of our consciousness. And if our consciousness is altered, our relationship, our embedding within the world is very different. I can see this in mental disorders. So for me, consciousness is really a much more extensive, it's an intrinsically relational concept where you embed yourself in the world. And the question is, how does our brain, through its body, makes possible such an emplacement, embedding, integrating within the world? We call it temporal spatial alignment. So, and that leads me to yet another feature of consciousness in the Western world. In the Western world, it has a long tradition of considered to be special. So there is some special property, the mind as distinguished from the body, that goes back to Descartes, early modernity, 16th century. And of course, now the neuroscientists say, no, we are not Cartesian anymore, we are not Descartes, the dualism is out. I say, no, look how you conceive the brain. You conceive the brain in terms of non-special properties and then some special properties added on that account for consciousness. Information integration, it's a special property, global neuronal workspace, recurrent connection theory, higher order, all special mechanisms added on top of otherwise non-special mechanisms. However, I do think that you Indians know better. Meaning consciousness is probably not a special higher order feature, it's one of the most basic fundamental features of the world, including in other species. So that's why I like to look into nature. Let's have a look into nature. What do you see in nature? One key feature is continuous change. Fluctuation is called dynamics. The pattern of change. There's a pattern of change, and that pattern is central. Here is a beautiful quote by Nikola Tesla, the car guy, who was as eccentric as Elon Musk is, but he was probably also as brilliant. If you want, there's a museum of him in Belgrade. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. These are different features of dynamics and of nature. So, and that's exactly what I'm doing. That's what I propose, and the ones who do the bi-weekly lab meeting with me already know that I'm crazy about this time and space stuff. You have to be delusional sometimes. So, and what you also see in the brain, you see waves, you see fluctuations, you see continuous change. And there is a certain pattern to that change. That's important. And that pattern can be analyzed. So it's a lot about time series, and that's what our brain shares with the rest of nature. So here I show you that again. Here I show you the slightly different approaches. Here above, the Western world says, okay, there's a difference between consciousness and the brain, so meaning we need some special features in the brain. I say, no, there are basic similarities between consciousness, brain, and even the world. And what are these timescales? So we call that model a common currency model. And indeed, to my delight, it's picked up more and more because it's really a different entry point into the neuroscience of consciousness. And we all know, you particularly in the Indian tradition, you know how important your theoretical background model is, because it shapes what you can see and what you do not see in your data and how you analyze them. So that's really important. You see the subsequent study, and again, those who already work with me, they know how we try to really operationalize and put some empirical flesh to the model of common currency between shared dynamics between neuronal and mental states. So here I give you some empirical example. I will not go into detail because this is not the time to do that. But here, for instance, there are various papers which show here upper left that fluctuations in the brain, the frequency of those fluctuations is directly related to attentional fluctuations. So meaning the neuronal fluctuation predicts the attentional fluctuation. Shared similarity, variability. Then we did this for phase-based alpha-theta frequency processes, relation to off and on-task thought. A completely crazy thing. There are time scales to your thought. We have another paper, we have 2 papers in PNS on that now, on the time scale and the timing and phase dynamics of thoughts. Yeah, so thoughts, the most abstract cognitive feature of our mental life, you know, I'm a philosopher too, is time scales. It's relevant. Now the same we did here, lower the speed. The speed of your functional connection between the motor cortex and the rest of the brain is related to the speed of your movements in depression. Psychomotor retardation, neuronal retardation. So that really suggests that they share some features. Same on the topographic side, and I will show you more of that the organization of your brain into unimodal and transmodal features, higher order regions, lower order region, that balance is related to your balance of inner and outer contents in consciousness and also in meditation. I will come back to that later. So that's a various lines of empirical support for that dynamics, spatial and topographic and dynamic and temporal features are shared by neuronal and mental features. So it's really a new way of looking at the brain in terms of time and space, and also a new way looking at consciousness. Yeah, because then you want to also measure the experience of time and space. So that led us overall to what we call the temporal spatial theory of consciousness, and the various facets. And these are the earlier versions. We are currently working on an update, and I'm also working on a book of the errors of consciousness in the Western world. So now meditation. So you really got me, and that was largely the merit of Bindu, who really got me interested in meditation. Why? Meditation is a wonderful tool to study neuromental, neurophenomenal relationship, because you have a fantastic phenomenology. You have experience. These are extreme states, but the extreme states can tell you more about the brain than often the normal states. So, and of course, one key concept, and I don't need to tell this in India, you know, I don't say anything, it's just non-duality. So, and the question is, of course, there are various layers and facets and phenomenological and ontological layers of non-duality, which I will not touch upon that because that's your specialty. You're the expert, not me. However, for me, the question is, how can we operationalize non-duality? Yeah, of course, it will not have all the richness of the ontological and phenomenological concepts on non-duality, but at least it's a try. It's a try to link neuronal features to phenomenological features, from brain to experience. So, and one thing, those who know me already know that first with another student of mine, Austin Cooper, he investigated non-duality. We said, okay, what could be related to non-duality on the neuronal level? Given the common currency similarity between neuronal mental states, maybe there's a non-dual topographic organization on the level of the brain. So how to frame that? Here I don't need to tell you that. Usually we make a clear distinction between self and other, inner, outer self environment, but in the non-duality you don't have that difference anymore. I don't need to tell that anything. And there seem to be different kinds of roads to non-dual state, meaning different forms of meditation, different forms of induction, even going beyond the meditation. Sometimes you can experience the non-dual awareness also when you do sports or music. So how did he conceptualize? So he investigated proficient meditators versus novice meditators, and he did a meta-analysis of all fMRI studies. Basically, the studies usually compare meditation versus non-meditated resting state. And what he, for instance, observed here, you see the results of that, the default mode network and the central executive network. And usually they are in a negative relationship, meaning if the default mode network is increased, the central executive network is decreased, and vice versa. And what now is important that what he observed in the proficient meditators is these two networks were much more with each other connected, and in a 15 minutes. So it's about that they show a much higher degree of neuronal synchronization with each other. Yeah. So meaning, and you can see this here, they're no longer negatively related, nor positively related, but they completely synchronized with. Yeah. So meaning, and what does that mean in terms of neuronal processing? So it means that the inputs are no longer processed in a different way in the two networks. Meaning the two networks cannot exert differential contribution anymore. Meaning there's no distinction between inner and outer, because that's a distinction which our brain adds. But now the brain is completely synchronized, so the different regions cannot add this difference. So what you then experience is really no difference between inner and outer. So now you say, yes, Northoff, this is all right and nice and good, but it doesn't really relate. To the non-duality in the Indians. The self is dissolving, and there's no longer an experience of a self as distinct from environment. So Northoff, if you can operationalize that, you come a little bit closer to us. Okay, let's give it a try. So what we did in the study, there's an intrinsic topography of different layers of self in the brain, which is quite amazing. We did this, established this on large-scale meta-analysis, and now we probe this three-layer distinction of self also in different mental disorders. And what are these three layers? If your inner bodily self, this is based on a meta-analysis, large-scale meta-analysis, you have a set of regions related to the interceptive self-processing, particularly your experience of your inner body. Then you have regions, a set of regions related to the extraceptive self, your outer bodily proprioceptive self. And then you have regions related to your mental self, which is mainly the cortical midline structure. So, and now we investigated those three set of regions in the novice meditators and the proficient meditators. And what we observed, we found significantly more activity in the novice meditator in the mental layers of self regions and less in the interceptive. And that makes sense, because usually your sense of self is dominated by your continuous cognitive thoughts and processing about yourself, meaning your mental self. And your body is more in the background than you expect. Now in the meditator, interestingly, it was exactly the other way around. So now you saw much stronger activity in the interceptive self regions than in the mental. So it was exactly the other way around, meaning your interface with the environment was much larger. So and that's what we try to have, meaning your interface is much larger, and probably we need to test it in the future. Your synchronization with the environment is much stronger. So, and if that is the case, if your brain is much more synchronized with your environmental context, then of course you don't experience any difference anymore between yourself and your environment. Non-duality. So this and various other findings is summarized in this very beautiful figure by Bianca Ventura, you from the Consciousness Center, you already know her. She's amazing in doing these beautiful figures. And she summarized, and this is a paper we just published, you see it lower right, default mode and in a time consciousness. So here you see in the, my cursor here, you see in the middle, you see this is basically the gradient between sensory regions and higher order regions like the default mode network. And if the activity is strongly tilted towards the DMN, you usually experience yourself as different from the environment. Now, if that is taken to an absolute extreme, that's what you see in depression. You see a complete DMN-centric topography, and yourself is highlighted, and you barely experience your environmental context anymore. And that's exactly what these patients experience. Extreme degree of focus on self and complete detachment from the environment. They don't feel the environment. Now, in mania, in bipolar, you see you have the opposite. You have the DMN center is completely lost and everything is shorted sensory regions. And what do you experience? You're completely glued to the environment, and you lose basically your experience of your concept of self. and your DMN extremely low in activity. So after seeing some of those findings, I asked my bipolar patients, what on earth do they experience, and how about their self in mania? I said, there is no self in mania. They're just completely driven by the stimulus of the environment. Now, so there, you can see this here, it's tilted into the opposite direction. And what you have in meditation and also psychedelic states, the gradient between unimodal and transmodal region is flat. So there's no difference anymore. The functional connectivity, the time scales between unimodal and transmodal regions are similar. And you can literally see this. And if they are similar, then your prefrontal cortex cannot add anything anymore. So it's the same. So your input is processed throughout the same. And so the brain doesn't make a difference anymore, meaning you don't experience a difference anymore between yourself and environment. So that, of course, need to be sharpened, but that's the idea where we assume that's really related to non-duality. And I hope we can conduct future fMRI studies where we have also some scales for non-dual experience. How about the time? So here's another study which we did. This is Bianca Ventura from my group. She investigated different forms of meditation which require different attentional windows. Shoonya, you just let the thoughts pass by, so you don't need to focus on anything, meaning you have longer attentional windows. Whereas in the Vipassana, you scan on different body parts, and you need really precise, short temporal windows to distinguish the different body parts. And mantra with the chanting is sort of in between. So now you have temporal windows of attention. So now the question is, are these temporal windows of attention related to temporal windows on the brain in the neuronal activity? And you can measure these temporal windows through the autocorrelation window. I think it's very popular in your lab, so I don't need to say much. It basically measures the degree to which the neuronal activity correlates with itself over time. And that's exactly what Bianca did in EEG. I provide you the summary results. You see long autocorrelation window in the Shoonya, where you have long temporal windows in your attention and in your meditative experiential state. You have shorter, very short temporal windows in your Vipassana meditation, where you need short temporal windows in your meditation to scan the different body parts. And you see the in time scale, in the mantra, it's an intermediate. So you really see the time scales are shared. The duration of the time scales is shared between neuronal and mental levels. And that's the common currency. And that, I would argue, explains your experience. Yeah. And so we have more studies. Saket, who introduced the session, has a beautiful paper just submitted. I think it's already in review, I hope, on non-dual similarity and time scaling during internal and external tasks of the ACW, and really linking with the experience of non-duality. I didn't present this work here because it's his, and I hope in future he can present this here. So, meaning the time scales are really key for linking the neuronal activity, the time scales of your neuronal activity, with the time scales of your phenomenological or psychological activity in your experience. And that shapes your experience. So you can already see, for me, consciousness is an intrinsically temporal spatial feature. Now, I have to admit this because I'm often confronted with that people experience a standstill of time in the strong, extreme meditative states. But that only means that your past and present and future are completely balanced. Yeah? So you don't make a difference between past, present, and future, but it doesn't mean that there is no time and change of time anywhere. By the way, I always like this little mushroom here as indicator for the psychedelics. So, coming to the conclusion. Very simple. What is relevant for the world, I assume, is also relevant for consciousness. Why? Because consciousness and the brain are part of the world. So you need to go back to the most basic features of the world, space and time, to understand consciousness. When you look into the history of science, that's exactly what many people did. They went to the basics. Copernicus went to the basics of the universe, abstracted from this anthropocentric view. Yeah, Darwin went to the basics of biological evolution. So you need to go back to the basic features of the world, That's what the temporal spatial theory of consciousness is about. And I show you, this is the second to last slide. I show you with a very, I think, a very relevant remark. We hardly ever consider the time scales of consciousness. Consciousness itself has a very limited time scale range. You're only conscious of processes lasting to 30 to 50 milliseconds, up to 3 to 5 seconds. Shorter time scales, 10, 20 milliseconds, you cannot consciously experience. You cannot experience the 1 millisecond time scale of your action potential. So the 1 millisecond action potential has huge impact on your 20 to 30 millisecond threshold of consciousness. Same on the other end. We have experiences about 3 to 5 seconds duration. We cannot experience longer process in a stretch. So meaning, for instance, we cannot experience 100 seconds. Now the 100 seconds is the time scale in our brain. When you look into the infraslow frequency ranges of the brain, 0.01 hertz, that's about 100 seconds. Yeah, and that's very relevant for consciousness, though you cannot experience. So that's what I try to indicate here, that the time scales of consciousness is a very small range in humans. In animals, you have slightly different time scale ranges. Yeah, the famous example of what is it like to be a bat by Thomas Nagel, that's the time scale, the ultrasonar waves, which we cannot process. Yeah, but the bat can. So meaning the bat will experience an environment in a very different way than us, because it will experience the ultrasonar waves, which we can only measure but cannot experience. So, and ultimately, that for this is more sort of now a philosophical ontological remark at the end. This amounts to a nestedness of different timescales. Yeah, the consciousness timescales are nested within the timescales of the brain. The timescales within the brain are nested within the timescales of the body, and then within the world. So, and that I think we haven't really understood, in particular that nestedness. Yeah, that's something we haven't really operationalized and studied. So, with that, I come to the end. And again, Bindu, I really, really appreciate our dialogue, and I hope we can continue the dialogue. And I also hope that we can have some more tunnel experiences. And I hope that we can also explore consciousness and its fascinating variety in India. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Georg Northoff, for very lucid and comprehensively providing an evidence for the dual as well as non-dualistic evolutionary concept related to the consciousness. In fact, I want to share that in the 1988, Professor T. Desiraju, he proposed the hypothesis of dualistic and non-dualistic evolutionary theory based on the thalamocortical specific and non-specific activities in the studied in the monkey experiments. Okay, that's in 1988. So now, subsequently, a lot of evidences has been originated based on the neuroimaging studies and the functional imaging, electrophysiological studies. Now we have a significant evidence to indicate that you have the dualistic and non-dualistic evolutionary concepts to understand the higher functions of the brain, like the consciousness. So thank you very much for comprehensively providing the evidences in terms of the spatio-temporal dimensions and also dynamicities associated with the consciousness. Thank you very much. And so maybe we can take a couple of questions from the participants. Is it that is okay, George?
Yeah, okay, fine, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Sagarika.
There she is. I finally see her. Hello, Bindu.
Dr. Bindu is there. Okay, just behind Dr. Bindu.
I see it. Finally, I see her. Okay, hello.
Hi, Jesse Northoff. I'm so impressed with your talk. We were looking forward to listen to you. Anyway, I'll be in touch with you. My team will continue our discussion, weekly discussions. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and delivering this such a wonderful talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the tunnel experiences. It's for a very special consciousness.
Only the tunnel experience you remember.
No, everything. You know, it left a lasting impression, as you can see.
Bye.
Yeah.
Now, George, the tunnel at Nimhans, what you experience, it takes you to the different worlds of the consciousness. In the one hand, you try to understand the higher functions of the brain, the research we do. On the other hand, you try to understand how the consciousness is affected in the patients. So that's what is the tunnel which links between two components of our institute. So thank you very much for reminding that.
Hello,
Yes, Sagarika. Yeah.
hello, Professor. It was very interesting talk, and yes, it's very thought-provoking. But one thing I was wondering, as you showed that DMN and executive networks, they are in balance in the meditators. So this is very interesting for me because in normal they are not in balance. If one is active, another is inactive. It's a switch on and switch off mode, and also in patient they go haywire, and that's why we see the symptoms what we see. So can we see that this balance kind of thing what you see in meditators which you don't see usually, is it more than normal, it is super normal, or it's something beyond normal?
I like these little exaggerations here. Yeah, so I think, and you saw that in the two figures which I showed, for me it's very important to consider neuronal activity, like in this case, the balance between DMN and CEN, in a larger context, meaning from all possible states, from extreme to normal to the other extreme. Yeah? So because that gives you a whole view. So you see, if you're extremely disbalanced towards the transmodal, you're depressed. If you're extremely disbalanced towards the unimodal, you're manic. If you have complete balance, that's your meditation proficient or psychedelic state. Yeah, and usually it's a little bit disbalanced tilted towards the DMN, as we all know, because we are more centered on ourselves and the environment. So, and I think that's really, really important. So if you call that supernormal or a little bit abnormal, I would say it's a dynamic range of different possible topographic states. Yeah, and that includes what we call abnormal, like the depression mania at the extremes. Yeah, so I think it's really important. We often just make a cut. We say, okay, we just look at the middle, the normal state, and then look at the extremes, but we need to see it's a continuum. And nature and brain works in terms of continua, and that's what we see in dynamic balances and continua here. And that's, I think, why we always consider these whole states.
Okay, thank you very much, George. So I always remember that how spatio-temporally firing of the neurons at the right time, at the right place with the networks, they are extremely important in terms of understanding and evaluating the higher functions of the brain. And that's what you explained so nicely. And we'll continue our collaborations and discussions later on. And thank you very much for taking your time and to be part of this symposium. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and all the best. And again, Bindu, all
Yeah,
the
thank
best.
you.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Off, I think. Thank you, Dr. Northoff, for that wonderful talk. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. Your passion really inspires us.